So hello everyone, my name is Tetiana Rashevska. I work in aspect translations. I'm the head of translation and editing department. So first of all, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank the organizers and the whole team of UT Camp for inviting me here for this wonderful event and gave me a chance to share my experience. It's my first experience being a speaker here at UT, and so I'm a little bit nervous because it's a great experience for me. Thank you very much for your support, for your attention, for this wonderful atmosphere. I'm really happy to be here. To begin with, I will say a few words about myself. I studied to be a translator. I graduated from Kharkiv National University. Then I worked as a professor and I taught translators. And for the past 10 years, I work as translator and editor. And in my company, in my department, I don't just edit text, but I also assist translators who are coming into profession so to learn and to grow. And I also do editing. And so today we'll talk about the quality of translation. And I will try to give you a few recommendations about translator-editor cooperation. Let's start. So today we'll discuss three key aspects. First of all, what feedback is. So we will use feedback just like to be simple, so their tools and functions. Then we'll look at types and categories of mistakes. And also we'll talk about communication between editor and translator. And at the end, we will have 10 minutes, so we will write feedback together about translation. And I will answer all your questions. So please prepare your questions, and the most active participants will get a small souvenir from me. And those colleagues who are watching online can participate in the discussion. They can ask their questions. And we can use post to send you some souvenirs. So about feedback. This topic is discussed very often on different professional conferences. I think it was discussed twice last year at UTIC, but it's still relevant, and in some way it's a bit painful topic. So I will try to dig deeper and try to understand what feedback is and what source you serve it with and why we shouldn't be afraid of it. So why do we need feedback? As I work in translation company, almost every day I see feedback in different formats. When I cooperate with my team, or when we work with translator, with an editor, the third party. Today, we will mostly concentrate on the cooperation of translator and editor. So why do we need well-organized structural feedback? It gives us high quality of work, the high quality of the end product of the translation. Also, it's a very powerful tool for cooperation for all the parties involved, between manager, translator, editor, and the client. Also, feedback allows us to build communication for all the parties involved. I mean, healthy communication and productive cooperation. Also, well-organized systematic feedback helps the company to teach their translators, because if the translator doesn't know how to do something, they will do the way they can or the best they can. So in order to cooperate with translators, it's very important to have good feedback. And also, it allows to build effective long-term relationship with our clients, which is also, of course, very important, because it's important to have respect in this relationship and to be oriented on a good result. When I was preparing this presentation, I remembered one more thing, the Heuristic Theory, which we all love, which says that it's very important to be predictable understandable and logical, and in this way you can have a good professional relationship in the team, and of course it will lead to a good high quality result which we all want and need. So the tools, feedback, in our case, we will just touch upon a little bit because we can get feedback in different formats. This can be assessment form, LQA, LRS, ICR. This can be just comments in PDF or Word format. Also, change tracker can be used. So we get feedback in all types of shapes and forms. The only thing that unites all these tools, that's the fact that in each of them there is a comment from editor and with a category of mistakes. Also depending on the priority, and the direction of work, there can be different types of criteria, can be 10, 15 or 5. And we need not just to present general impression, but the number of corrections for a certain amount of text. And these corrections we calculate, we're using score system. For any format, it's very important to have certain metrics. And every company, they can use the tool, existing tools, or they can come up with their own ideas. They can use LISA, DQF, SDL. And I would like to present a small comment that not always we have very high expectations about quality, because sometimes we need really high quality translation, and sometimes just good isn't enough. And sometimes when we have editing after machine translation, so there even some typos or some stylistic inaccuracies are still accepted. So in our next section, we will try to define the category of the mistake. And this part is the same for editors and translators. So here you can see a few categories. So we have preferential, minor, major, and critical. And I would like to note that the mistake can be different depending on context, the topic, and also where exactly we can see this mistake in translation, in this chalk. So what is 2 plus 2? It depends whether you are buying or selling. So whether this typo was in the headline or just somewhere in the text, so it matters. So for example, if we talk about medical translation, so any inaccuracy of some numbers, so it can be critical mistake, for example, about dosage. It can lead to some fatal consequences for patients. But at the same time, if this is just some general content, some statistics, so for example, whether this 56 or 57% of, it will not lead to any serious consequences, so it's just a mistake. And for that reason, we can put it into major, not critical. Or also when we talk about typos, so if it's somewhere in the middle of the text, readers can not even notice it. But if it is typo on the billboard, you can imagine it definitely goes up to critical, because this mistake can lead to some financial consequences, financial losses for circulation, for printing, and all the works involved. So let's go along this pyramid. So what is the most important? So we need to understand what preferential correction is, because not always editors are commanded to correct them. And very often, preferential, many people think that this is just about style, but that's incorrect, because style, that's a category of mistakes. And if you talk about style, the mistakes in this area, they can be major, minor, or critical. And at the same time, preferential corrections can be in any category.
For example, this edit was needed only because of the editor thought that it doesn't make the translation better or worse when it comes to this style of translation. How do we define whether an edit is preferential? We ask two questions. Is the translation accurate, and is the translation grammatically correct? Any repetition, any mistake that is repeated can be considered as preferential. For example, if there was a penalty point for a mistake which was considered major or minor, if this mistake is repeated, then it is preferential edit. Second, minor mistakes. Minor mistakes are mistakes that doesn't affect the meaning of the text. They can affect the meaning of the text in a minor way, but it won't have any effect on the operation of the program or user experience. User can notice this mistake, this error, but it almost doesn't distort the meaning. This might be punctuation or syntax problems or typos. Typos are also mostly considered minor errors. Significant errors, they substantially distort the meaning of the text. They can lead to misunderstanding of the device or software. These are parts in the visible part of the documentation, in titles, in lists, contents. Also errors which are related to omissions or additions of the text. Translations which sound not consistent, and critical mistakes, critical errors. These are errors which substantially distort the meaning. They can lead to serious consequences. They can mislead the reader. Such errors might lead to problems, to threats to health, to safety hazards. They might lead to different problems. They might have legal consequences, financial losses, and reputational losses. For example, if there are potentially bad translations which might offend the company, that might undermine the company's reputation, and they are also considered major errors. There happen errors. For example, one term is improperly translated, and then everything goes downwards, starting from that. So the text is okay, but it might lose all meaning because of that error. And now let's proceed to categories of mistakes, of errors. I define 5 error categories, though there are much more of them, several dozens. Let me remind you that this is not a dogma. I only selected 5 categories just to illustrate how the process, how the procedure of quality check is carried out. So what is the most important? This is accuracy. This is about translation accuracy, missed words or characters, omissions, completeness on translation. So, for example, a sentence needed to be translated, but the translator just missed it. And then numbers. The second category is terminology. Industrial terminology, compliance with the glossary, and consistency of terminology. I'll elaborate about industrial terminology for a second. This is quite a tricky category. In business, we have mission and vision. We can translate it as vision or visa in the context of management of the team. This is a normal term, but very often it is translated as concept, and this is a mistake. This is an error. This is the wrong use of industrial terminology, because it doesn't fully explain the essence of this term. Sometimes there are problems with fluency or with grammar, with literacy. We also have grammar and punctuation and syntax mistake. As for the standards, I think everything is clear. This is about instructions, about guidelines of formatting, using of tags, adaptation to the local market. So this is all about standards. And my favorite category, this is style. In this category, we have lexical errors. This is wrong use of words. For example, the wrong use of the meaning of the word. Or for example, when I have the word accept, or to take measures and to take steps. This is called contamination. In this category, we also have use of slang words, out of place, of course. These errors are usually considered minor. General style. In this category, I also have tools of language tools, for example, repetitions and moments when translation sounds artificial, when it doesn't sound proper, when logic of the language is distorted. It may even lead to a comic effect. So this is about style. Such errors, they don't usually have an impact on the meaning of the text, so they're considered minor, but they might also be major at times. I also refer to this category improper style, improper tone, register, or for example, different uses of words which are improper in this area. For example, when there is an application for a medical form, when children are treated as adults, and when you use when they use different forms. In Russian, it makes a difference. These errors might also be major or minor. Especially for you, I prepared a spreadsheet, a matrix or cheat sheet with categories and frequency of errors. I analyzed that most often in the accuracy category we have minor and major errors or critical errors. As for the terminology, these are usually minor or major errors. As for the language, these are minor and major. As for the style category, there might be minor, major, or preferential errors, but I cannot really remember of any critical errors in this area. As for the standards or compliance, some of these errors might be preferential, minor, or major. So now, after I've told you about all this, I would like to tell you that the decision on each error is done separately. The same mistake in different contexts, as I told you, can have different consequences. As I already told you, light post editing is okay when typos happen. If there are few typos per 1,000 words, but the same error, the same typo on a label on a medicine might have serious financial consequences if it has already gone into print, and it also might have a lot of problems for the translator and the company. And now let's go to practice. I have a couple of examples for you. Of course, there are a lot of errors in these examples, but I just selected a few of them. So I took a sentence. This is just a simple language, a simple sentence. This is a guideline on using cookie files. In order to do this, follow the instructions provided by your browser, usually located within settings, help tools, or added facility. The translation was the following. So now Tetiana reads the Russian translation, which contains errors. So here we see an omission of the word. cookies can be found, so the words can be found are missed in the Russian translation. That is why here we have an error in the accuracy category, and this is a major error, because a word was omitted and the reader doesn't understand what had to be there. Okay, we added that cookies are usually located within the settings facility. So here we have an error, because actually we're talking here not about cookies but about settings, but about the instructions. So we cannot define it as critical, but it's not minor, because the meaning of the text has been distorted. Then we also have stylistic errors. For example, in your browser, for Russian as well as for Ukrainian, we don't usually use a lot of these words. That is why we need to remove this word. And this is not a preferential mistake, not a preferential error. This is a minor error. And we have another stylistical error. As you can see in the original translation, we have one sentence and words between the brackets. So the translation completely mimics the original text, the syntax of the original text. But if we save this original structure of the text, then we will have repetition. Instruction or guidelines and guidelines. So the word instruction is used twice in the translation. That is why I wanted to use transformation and divide the sentence into two. This is a minor error, not a preferential one. And then editing. Then we use nouns rather than verbs for the name of the sections. Then another example. The ambient temperature of the ambience. So I think we can use it, we can define that this mistake, this error is from the terminology category, and the accuracy of translation is also affected. As for the style, this is also a stylistical error. Another error is about punctuation. There is a comma which is not needed. That is why we need to remove that. There is no comparison in this case. That is why we don't need comma in Russian language. And then I have one more example. I will tell you briefly about it. The translation was done into Ukrainian. First, we have grammatical errors. I would like to highlight that the word symptoms was in singular instead of plural. Then we also have problems with the words with style. There is also grammatical error, problem with euphony. Then we also have a stylistical error or translation of the word fever. Then we have a word in Ukrainian which sounds similar to Russian, a construction which is actually mimicked from the Russian language. So this error can be considered a minor one. And then we have another error, that the temperature is less than 38 degrees. And we need to use, and actually it is a mistake, because in the original text the temperature has to be more or equal to 38 degrees. And now let's switch to the next slide. This is more for fun. I hope that by this time I managed to persuade you that these errors are very important, that some of errors cannot distort the meaning, but they might distort the text. So I selected several examples from the text I worked with. Sometimes translators asked us to review the edits, and they said that this was a preferential edit. So can you please change the category of the error or just remove this edit? It's not always right, it's not always proper. So here on the slide you can see several cases. I really like several cases. For example, imagine what we can achieve if each of us decides to think. And excellent service starts and ends with you.
So please suppress your urge to teach. This also sounds wonderful. So it was really interesting to see it in context. And also I have a small collection for you, but with typos. Probably my favorite, which I saw in my practice in one of the messengers, so that the buttons send was translated as to bend, but in Russian it sounds as send. It sounds like poison, which doesn't work in English, but it always sounded like really fun. But for you to understand the essence of this mistake, so for example, we can say that read this particle, or providing instead of providing, space shuffle. And of course, now we are ready to talk about getting edits. And those who haven't received them yet, so you are very lucky to be here, because you will know how to respond and what to do in this case. So this is a screen from my recent project. And so that's the number of edits. So I'm I have a high level of empathy, and I try to fill in the shoes of the translator to get a document like this. Probably if that happened 10 years ago, I would have shocked and lots and lots of negative emotions. I did my best, and I worked so hard to translate this, but the editor ruined everything. And of course, the translator immediately writes a comment to the editor. My favorite comment from my practice, it's not a joke. So that was their Google trash, or Google Translate got drunk. It's not real editing. Or the comment was, yeah, sure, add some more commas, we can never have enough of them. So I decided to give a few pieces of advice. So yes, stick to your principles. You always need to show that you disagree. You always have to disagree with all the edits, and the original translation was better. That's the best you can write. Remember that you are always right, and editor is always wrong, so prove them wrong. And it's better to write a long letter about your long experience in translation, and you can use all kinds of language, because you don't know this person, so they have no feelings. And of course, style guide or glossary, who needs those? Because I know that's the way how it should sound, and that's enough. And the best comments in this area, that was, so it's, for example, that's a weird demand. Nobody asked me to do that before. And also don't forget to give advice to the editor, and you need to be quite strict, because if you're strict, they will immediately follow your advice. So remove this error, explain to me, change the category. But if to be serious, I prepared a table of do's and don'ts, good and bad. If you write a comment to the editor, you have to provide your reasoning. You can provide some links to reliable sources, glossaries, textbooks, dictionaries, laws, state standards. In some cases, so reverse translation can help as well. It's not enough just to write that you disagree. also preferential editors. So they are preferential for a reason. You shouldn't waste your time or editor's time, even if the comment for preferential edit you write, this is preferential change. So according to certain procedure, this comment has to be sent to the editor by the manager, and the editor will have to respond somehow to this. So don't waste yours and editor's time. Because it's always really funny to see comments like this. When I put it into categories preferential, and the translator says, that's preferential, edit. Yes, I know. So you always need to have really honest analysis, so take responsibility for your mistakes. It sounds obvious, but of course we want to get really positive feedback, we want to get higher marks, and of course I want that too. But if you admit that, yes, that was a mistake, so then it can be resolved on manager's level, maybe to give some discount. But if you get to the third party, and so it will be very unpleasant and it will look really bad. We still should remember about style and about being polite. Of course, you can write unpleasant letter, unpleasant comment, and you might think that, oh, they would not really mind. No, they do mind. And next time, probably they will not choose, you will not be their first choice. And that's not the way we want to cooperate. So we want to have productive cooperation. So terminology, that's of course is very important. That's a holy grail. And of course, for example, in some companies, preferential edit can be called instruction. So it's important to use the terminology which is used by client because it shows your respect and good manners. So always speak the language of the client. And the last is my favorite. And don't tell the editor what they have to do. Let's move on. So here you can see some edits that you might disagree. So if we write comments, so how we do this? So first of all, we need to check whether that was a mistake of the editor. Then whether they selected the category appropriately. Then we need to give reasoning on our position. We provide a link to certain reliable sources. We ask, we don't demand. We don't use like do that or don't do that, but please consider because I believe. And of course, we always check whether we don't have typos in our comment. And for example, in the first example, a responsible researcher, and it was edited into the chief researcher. That's more using the Russian word in Ukrainian language, and that's probably not in compliance with Ukrainian legislation. So we can just use a link to about clinical trials, some documents about clinical trials, and prove that you are right. Or editor use, for example, and deleted the comma, but we can explain why we need to use two commas with this word, so that's easy to prove. And we always need to be polite because it's important for both of us to get translation without mistakes. It's not our task to prove who is right and who is wrong. And what to do if you are the editor and you need to write a comment? So you are this evil editor, and your comments matter because they will influence the way how you will work with translator, with the company, with third party. We shouldn't forget about general principles of the comment. You need to write your general impression, to clarify maybe which aspects you saw most often. You don't use the word mistake in this case, and give some recommendations, some room for improvement. And also give some recommendations whether they need to work on style or accuracy and maybe what they should improve. Let's imagine that we need to write a comment about the work of a translator. So just let me take a step back. So why this section is called overall everything is good, but there are a few things. So I have my former colleague, he is a wonderful editor, but he doesn't like to written comments. He likes to have a conversation with young translators, and every conversation he starts with this introduction. Overall, everything is good, but there are a few things. And people can faint and they're shocked, especially when they see this number of errors, like that number that you saw on the previous slide. So what we are going to do, so if you're an editor, try to write a short feedback based on this table. And if you're a translator, imagine yourself in the shoes of the editor and try to evaluate this translation. So here we have their assessment form based on the categories that we looked into. So the translator followed the glossary, everything is good, but there was some mistake with one term, then there was a repetition, and the wrong case, so passive voice was used. And also the translator needs to work with commas, and maybe there were a few typos as well, so there are 4 mistakes. So now you have 5 minutes, so please write your feedback. Imagine that you are an editor. And while you are writing your comments, so maybe some of you have questions. So the translation was about 1,000 words. If you need a pen or paper, I have everything you need. And masters of feedback will get some prizes. It's okay, you can write in any language which is comfortable for you, Russian or English. So, do you have any questions? I'm the person who works with clinical trial, and this we talked about fever and chief researcher. So it's actually when we look at some glossaries, so these glossaries can already have wrong versions. So we as translators, we cannot change glossaries even if it's not in compliance with official documents. So what can editors maybe do something here? Thank you very much. It's a very interesting example. We cannot violate rules. So the demand of the client, that's something that we cannot overstep, but we can discuss it. What I do this, and I recommend my guys for this, so we use terminology recommended by the client, but we send out the comment that, for example, in this glossary, you use this word with this equivalent, and it's not really correct because there are certain official documents and other words are used. So let us help you to change your glossary, but also we need to take into account how big the translation memory base is. So if you have the right approach to the client, maybe you will be lucky, and the client will really pay attention to this incorrect glossary, so they might send you some additional work so that you can have some edits in translation memory. So we had this practice. So we wrote comment in a very nice, appropriate way. And so if we got even some top projects like to work with these clients again. Thank you very much. I have a question to you as an editor. Statistically, can you roughly estimate to provide the reaction of a translator to all of this feedback? Of course, if there is feedback. If it's not really positive, when everything is wonderful, that's of course we understand the reaction. But how do translators respond when they get not very positive feedback overall?
Thank you so much for the question, Victoria. Well, I don't have statistics like that. What I would say about 5%, 5 to 10%. So this from 5 to 10% of translators react negatively to this feedback, but it's actually a minor part of the translators. Interpreters, they do want to get feedback. They want to get it, they are happy to see the edits, to see the changes, especially when their translation is not excellent, but good enough. They are really happy because they need they have this space to grow. And they are really grateful for the feedback. They write back to me saying thank you. Sometimes it happens that according to the procedure, we don't have to show the edits and they get back to us and tell us, I spent so much time translating this and I'm really excited to see how the text turned out in the end. So can you please show me the edits? I really like different Q&A formats. What I really like online forums where translators can ask the questions to the editor or proofreader or to other people who are more competent to answer this question. It really works well. Those questions which they submit online, we can get back to these questions, and we actually submitted these questions online, and the translators can see frequently asked questions. So this is also a way of feedback, of providing feedback. Victoria, your next question. Thank you so much. And then another question. I'm probably part of the major part of these translators, but very often I know that editors and owners of translation agencies they complain that translators very often are negative towards these feedback because they think that they are criticized. So probably I call on to young translators to treat it as a free way to improve yourself, to improve your work. I've been on the market for many years, and not all clients send this feedback. Very few clients do that, and they say everything is okay. Why do I have to send you the feedback? There are some clients which always send me the feedback. If even I disagree with some aspects, I always say thank you. And sometimes I make some notes because some of the edits might be preferential, but for a particular client it might be very important. Maybe that's a company or a client who would like to write it in this way. And I do that. I make a note that in the future for this particular client I will translate this word in a particular way. And another question, do you praise the interpreters? Do you give positive feedback? Do you write that they are excellent, that they are the best? Because very few clients tell us that. For example, when I send my first text to the client and then they ask me to do it for the second time, and I say, no, I'm busy, and they say, oh, please, the editor was so happy with your translation last time. That is why I try to work with clients. This is an additional motivation to take this translation, and this is just a comment. It's not actually a question. Thank you so much. Yes, really, it's important to hear positive feedback, and very often clients forget about that. Do you, as an agency, for example, when there is post-editing, and if you get feedback from the client, who comments on that comment, the editor or the translator? Because it often happens when you say feedback to the translator with an LQA, with comments, and when you ask to comment how they did these mistakes, these errors, and they say, oh, the editor is responsible for that. I'm not the one to blame. Okay, let me put it this way. Different companies, different agencies have different requirements. If you work according to ISO standards, according to them, the translator is responsible for the terminology and the editor is responsible for the style, for the accuracy of translation. If the editor, for example, changes terminology, then of course he or she is responsible for that. It is normal if an editor replies to an LQA, if he or she is busy, or if he or she is on vacation, or if they are busy with another project, then we can ask a translator to do that. I think it's okay. Thank you for the question.